30,000 feet in the air, the rules of society are supposed to be left on the tarmac. But prejudice, it seems, has no trouble upgrading to first class. The cabin of Flight 4482 was dead silent, save for the dull, rhythmic hum of the auxiliary power unit. Every eye was locked on the 17-year-old boy clutching his boarding pass like a shield. Standing over him was a man whose custom-tailored Italian suit cost more than the teenager's entire college tuition, demanding the boy surrender his seat. When the flight attendant immediately sided with the millionaire, ordering the young black teenager to gather his things and move to a middle seat in the back of economy. It seemed like a tragically familiar story of power and privilege. But neither the entitled passenger nor the complicit crew member knew exactly who was sitting in the cockpit, listening to every word. 17-year-old Elijah Brooks had never been on an airplane before, let alone in the plush, oversized leather seats of a first-class cabin. Growing up on the south side of Chicago, his world had been defined by city buses, the roar of the L train, and the four walls of his high school robotics lab. He was a quiet, fiercely intelligent kid who had spent the last 3 years building autonomous drones out of scrap metal and sheer willpower. His dedication had finally paid off. He had secured a final, in-person interview for the most prestigious engineering scholarship the Massachusetts Institute of Technology had to offer. The ticket to Boston had been a gift. Dr. Linus Sterling, a wealthy philanthropist and the primary sponsor of Elijah's high school STEM program, had insisted on using his own accumulated miles to book the boy in first class. "You need to arrive rested, sharp, and feeling like you belong there, Elijah," Dr. Sterling had told him. "Because you do." Now, sitting in seat 2A of the Boeing 737, Elijah was trying his hardest to believe those words. He felt entirely out of place. He had dressed neatly in a crisp white button-down shirt and a modest navy blue blazer, but compared to the surrounding passengers draped in designer labels and flashing platinum watches, he felt like an imposter. He nervously sipped the complimentary sparkling water a flight attendant had handed him, his backpack stowed safely beneath the seat in front of him. He was early, having boarded with the first group, and he spent the time marveling at the leg room and the pristine, polished wood-grain accents of the armrests. The boarding process continued, a steady stream of passengers filtering past the first-class cabin toward the rear of the plane. That was when Harrison Montgomery boarded. Harrison was a man who moved through the world assuming it would part for him. He was the CEO of Montgomery Capital, a mid-sized but fiercely aggressive hedge fund, and he wore his arrogance like a heavy cologne. At 55, with silver hair slicked back and a perpetual scowl etched into his features, Harrison was used to giving orders and having them instantly obeyed. Trailing behind him was his wife, Cynthia, looking exhausted and carrying a designer handbag that cost more than a reliable used car. As Harrison reached row 2, he stopped abruptly. He checked his boarding pass, then looked up at the seat numbers. He had been booked late due to a rescheduled meeting, and his assistant had only managed to secure him seat 2B, the aisle seat next to Elijah, while his wife was seated 2 rows back in 4B. For Harrison Montgomery, sitting apart from his wife, and more importantly, not having a window seat, was simply unacceptable. He surveyed the cabin, his eyes darting around until they landed on seat 2A. He saw Elijah. He saw a young black teenager, looking nervous, looking young, and, in Harrison's prejudiced calculus, looking entirely out of place in a premium cabin. Harrison didn't see an MIT-bound engineering prodigy. He saw an opportunity. He saw a target he assumed would be easy to intimidate. Without a word of greeting, Harrison dropped his heavy leather briefcase directly onto Elijah's lap. Elijah flinched, the sharp brass corner of the bag digging into his thigh. "Excuse me," Harrison barked, his voice carrying the sharp, abrasive tone of a man addressing a disobedient subordinate. "You're in the wrong seat, kid." Elijah, startled and immediately anxious, reached for his boarding pass, which he had tucked into the breast pocket of his blazer. I don't think so, sir. I'm in 2A. Harrison scoffed loudly, a wet, condescending sound. He didn't even bother looking at the paper Elijah was holding up. "Look around you, son. Do you really think you belong up here? You probably got confused at the gate. Coach is back there." He pointed a thick, manicured finger toward the rear of the aircraft. "Now, pick up your little backpack and move. My wife will be taking this window seat." "Sir, this is my assigned seat," Elijah said, trying to keep his voice steady, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. He held the boarding pass out further. "See? E. Brooks. Seat 2A. Harrison's eyes narrowed. The fact that the boy wasn't immediately folding enraged him. He snatched the boarding pass from Elijah's hand, squinting at it. For a fraction of a second, confusion crossed his face as he read the name and the seat number, but it was quickly replaced by indignant rage. He shoved the paper back at Elijah. "Fake," Harrison muttered. "Or a system error. There's no way a kid like you paid for a $2,000 ticket. I'm a Diamond Medallion member. I fly 100,000 miles a year on this airline." He turned into the aisle and snapped his fingers loudly, a sharp crack that echoed through the quiet cabin. "Flight attendant," Harrison demanded, his voice echoing. "We have a problem here." Chloe Davenport, the senior purser for the flight, hurried over. She was a woman in her late 30s, with a perfectly practiced customer service smile, though the tightness around her eyes betrayed the stress of managing a fully booked flight out of O'Hare. She knew Harrison Montgomery. He was a frequent flyer on this route, and he was notoriously difficult. He had filed complaints against crew members in the past for issues as trivial as the temperature of his mixed nuts. "Mr. Montgomery, is there a problem?" Chloe asked, her tone instantly deferential, smoothing her hands over her uniform skirt. "Yes, Chloe, there is a massive problem," Harrison sneered, leaning against the overhead bin. "This boy has snuck into first class. He's sitting in my wife's seat. I need him removed immediately so we can get settled." Chloe turned her gaze to Elijah. Her practiced smile faltered slightly. Instead of questioning Harrison's aggressive claim, she immediately adopted a tone of suspicious authority toward the teenager. "Sir," Chloe said to Elijah, using a cold, clinical tone, "I need to see your boarding pass." Elijah, his hands trembling slightly, handed it over once more. "I haven't done anything wrong, Ma'am. It's my seat. My sponsor bought it for me." Chloe studied the pass. It was perfectly valid. The system showed seat 2A was occupied by an Elijah Brooks, fare class F, paid in full. However, standing next to her was a Diamond Medallion member who spent hundreds of thousands of dollars with the airline annually, a man who could easily make her professional life a nightmare. Consciously or unconsciously, Chloe made a choice about who held more value in this situation. "Well," Chloe said, her voice dropping to a loud whisper that the entire cabin could hear. "Sometimes there are glitches in the booking system, particularly with third-party apps or standby tickets." "It's not a standby ticket," Elijah protested, his voice cracking slightly before he cleared his throat to lower the pitch. "It's a confirmed ticket." "Listen to him," Harrison interrupted, leaning in close, his breath smelling of stale coffee and expensive mints. "He's getting belligerent. I don't feel safe with him sitting next to me. He's clearly trying to game the system." "Mr. Montgomery, please, I will handle this," Chloe said, attempting to placate the angry executive. She turned back to Elijah, her expression hardening. "Look, we need to accommodate our elite status members. There has clearly been an administrative error, and Mr. Montgomery requires this seat for his family. I'm going to have to ask you to gather your belongings." Elijah stared at her, stunned. "You're kicking me out of my seat? Because he wants it." "I am relocating you to your appropriate cabin," Chloe corrected, her tone dripping with corporate ice. She pulled a small device from her pocket, tapping the screen. "I have a middle seat available in row 34. I suggest you take it before I have to call the gate agent to have you removed from the flight entirely for non-compliance." A heavy silence fell over the first-class cabin. Several passengers were actively watching now. A woman across the aisle looked uncomfortable, burying her face in a magazine. A businessman in row 1 shook his head, but said nothing. The bystander effect was in full force. No one wanted to draw the ire of the wealthy, aggressive man or the flight attendant threatening to delay the departure. Elijah felt a hot flush of humiliation creep up his neck. He had spent his whole life navigating a world that constantly told him to shrink, to step aside, to make room for people who felt entitled to his space. But he remembered Dr. Sterling's words, "You belong there." "No," Elijah said. The word came out quiet but firm. Harrison's face turned an ugly shade of crimson. "Excuse me? What did you just say, boy?" "I said no," Elijah repeated, sitting up straighter, locking his hands together in his lap to stop them from shaking. "I have a valid ticket. I am flying to a college interview. I am not moving to the back of the plane just because you want my seat. This is unbelievable!" Harrison exploded, slamming his hand against the overhead compartment. "Chloe, are you going to let this thug dictate how you run your aircraft? I want him off the plane. Now, call security." Chloe was now visibly panicked. The boarding door was supposed to close in 5 minutes, and any delay would go on her record. She reached for the intercom phone on the galley wall. "Sir, you are creating a disturbance," Chloe warned Elijah, completely ignoring Harrison's physical outburst. "Federal law requires you to follow crew member instructions. If you do not stand up and move to row 34 right now, I will have airport police board the aircraft and escort you off in handcuffs. Your choice." The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Elijah's vision blurred with unshed tears of frustration and anger. He knew how this played out in the real world. He knew that if the police boarded, they wouldn't listen to the black teenager in the hoodie. They would listen to the panicked white flight attendant and the wealthy white executive. His MIT interview, his scholarship, his future, it could all be ripped away in an instant because a millionaire threw a tantrum. Slowly, feeling the crushing weight of a systemic injustice he could not fight alone, Elijah reached down to unbuckle his seatbelt. He was going to give up. But before the metal buckle could click open, a new voice cut through the tense atmosphere of the cabin. "Hold on a minute. Nobody is moving anywhere." The door to the flight deck had swung open. Standing in the threshold was Captain Nathaniel Rhodes. Captain Rhodes was a towering figure, a former Navy pilot with 25 years of commercial flying under his belt. He had a reputation among the crew as a strictly by-the-book commander who tolerated zero nonsense on his aircraft. He had graying hair neatly parted, sharp blue eyes that missed nothing, and a uniform that looked perfectly pressed despite the long hours of his shift. He had heard the commotion through the thin cockpit door. When he heard the word police and handcuffs, he had handed the pre-flight checklist over to his first officer and stepped out to intervene. "What exactly is the problem here, Chloe?" Captain Rhodes asked, his voice a low, rumbling baritone that instantly commanded the attention of the entire cabin. Chloe stepped back, immediately deferential. "Captain, we have a passenger dispute. This young man," she gestured vaguely toward Elijah, "is seated in 2A, but Mr. Montgomery requires the seat. There appears to be a ticketing glitch, and the passenger is refusing crew instructions to relocate to the main cabin. Harrison stepped forward, adopting a tone of forced camaraderie, assuming the captain would naturally side with a fellow man of authority and status. "Captain Rhodes, good to see you. Harrison Montgomery. Listen, this kid is being incredibly hostile. He slipped into first class and refuses to leave. He's disrupting your flight. Have security drag him off so we can make our slot." Captain Rhodes did not shake Harrison's extended hand. Instead, his gaze swept over the scene. The aggressive, red-faced executive, the panicked, biased flight attendant, and the young, terrified teenager holding his boarding pass with a white-knuckled grip. "Hostile?" Captain Rhodes repeated, raising an eyebrow. He looked directly at Elijah. The boy didn't look hostile. He looked like he was bracing for a blow. "Son," Captain Rhodes said gently, a stark contrast to the tone Chloe had used. "May I see your boarding pass and your ID, please?" Elijah swallowed hard and handed them over. "It's real, sir, I promise. I'm going to Boston for an interview at MIT. Captain Rhodes took the documents. He pulled a company tablet from his flight bag, which hung near the cockpit door. He typed in Elijah's confirmation number. He didn't just look at the seat assignment. He dug into the fare basis code, the payment history, and the booking agent. It took him less than 30 seconds to see the absolute truth. The ticket was a full fare, unrestricted first-class ticket. Paid in full. No glitches, no standby codes. Captain Rhodes then checked Harrison Montgomery's reservation. Seat 2B fare class, upgraded via elite status. Wife booked in 4B on a separate, heavily discounted economy ticket that had been waitlisted for an upgrade but had not cleared. The captain's jaw tightened. He understood exactly what was happening. It was an ugly, naked display of entitlement, fueled by prejudice, and his own crew member had actively facilitated it. He handed the ID and boarding pass back to Elijah. "Thank you, Mr. Brooks, and congratulations on the MIT interview. That's a hell of an accomplishment." Elijah blinked, stunned. Thank you, sir." Captain Rhodes turned his attention to Harrison, and the warmth completely vanished from his eyes, replaced by a cold, unyielding steel. "Mr. Montgomery," the captain said, his voice carrying the authority of a judge handing down a sentence. "There is no glitch. Mr. Brooks's ticket is valid, paid for, and confirmed. Seat 2A is his." Harrison's mouth dropped open in outrage. "Are you kidding me? I am a Diamond Medallion member. I spend $500,000 a year with your airline. I told you I want my wife in that seat, and I want that kid out of here. Your status dictates how many bonus miles you earn, Mr. Montgomery," Captain Rhodes replied, stepping out fully into the aisle, forcing Harrison to take a step back. "It does not give you the right to steal a seat from a paying customer, nor does it give you the right to harass a minor on my aircraft." Chloe looked horrified. "Captain, We will discuss your handling of this situation in my office after we land, Chloe," Captain Rhodes snapped, silencing her instantly. He turned back to Harrison. "Now, Mr. Montgomery, you have a choice. You can take your assigned seat in 2B, and your wife can take her assigned seat in 4B, and we can push back. Or you can continue to cause a disturbance, and I will have you removed from this flight." The cabin erupted into low murmurs. The dynamic had shifted violently. Harrison, unused to being spoken to in such a manner, practically vibrated with rage. His ego could not handle the public reprimand, especially in front of a teenager he deemed beneath him. "You're making a massive mistake, Captain," Harrison snarled, pulling out his smartphone. "I know the Vice President of Operations at this airline, Gregory Simmons. We golf together. I am calling him right now, and I am going to have your wings stripped before we even reach cruising altitude." Harrison dialed the number, putting it on speakerphone to prove his power. The phone rang 3 times before going to a generic corporate voicemail. Harrison cursed, ending the call and dialing another number, furiously tapping at his screen. "I'm not sitting next to this kid," Harrison spat, his voice rising in volume, losing any shred of corporate composure. "And I'm not flying on a plane commanded by an insubordinate bus driver. If he stays, I don't fly." Captain Rhodes crossed his arms over his chest. He didn't blink. He didn't waver. He simply stared down the furious billionaire. "Is that your final decision, Mr. Montgomery?" Captain Rhodes asked calmly. "Yes," Harrison yelled. "Get him off, or I walk." Captain Rhodes nodded slowly. He reached for the PA microphone on the galley wall. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Rhodes's voice echoed through the entire aircraft, calm and steady. "This is your captain speaking. I apologize for the delay. We have a passenger who has decided he no longer wishes to travel with us today. We are currently waiting for the gate agents to process his removal, along with his luggage. I absolutely refuse to fly this aircraft until justice is done and our cabin is safe and respectful for all paying customers." He hung up the microphone and looked at Harrison. "You want it off, Mr. Montgomery," the captain said coldly. "Gather your things. You're holding up my flight." The twist of fate was set in motion, but Harrison Montgomery had no idea that his arrogant demand was about to trigger a chain reaction of karma that would systematically dismantle his entire life. Harrison Montgomery stood frozen in the aisle, the tailored shoulders of his expensive suit rising and falling with his heavy, enraged breathing. The declaration from Captain Rhodes echoed in the silent cabin. For a man whose entire life was built on bending others to his will, the blunt refusal was incomprehensible. He looked around the first-class cabin, expecting the other affluent passengers to rally to his defense. Instead, he found a wall of averted eyes, quiet judgments, and, in row 3, a young tech entrepreneur named Liam Gallagher, holding his smartphone perfectly steady, the camera lens pointed directly at Harrison's red face. "You cannot do this," Harrison hissed, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper as he realized his public temper tantrum was being recorded. "I know the executives at this company. I will have your pension, Rhodes." "My pension is safe, Mr. Montgomery," Captain Rhodes replied, his voice devoid of emotion. "Your presence on this aircraft, however, is not. Under FAA regulations, specifically regarding passenger interference and hostile behavior toward crew members and fellow passengers, I am exercising my authority as pilot in command to deny you transport. You are a security risk." "A security risk?" Harrison barked, letting out a humorless laugh. "I'm a CEO. This kid is the risk." He pointed a trembling finger at Elijah, who was still seated quietly in 2A, his hands folded tightly in his lap, watching the unraveling of a millionaire. Before Harrison could launch into another tirade, the heavy footsteps of airport security sounded on the boarding bridge. 2 uniformed officers, accompanied by the lead gate agent, David, stepped onto the aircraft. David looked incredibly stressed. A delayed flight out of O'Hare was a logistical nightmare. "Captain Rhodes, what's the situation?" David asked, glancing nervously between the imposing pilot and the furious executive. "Mr. Montgomery and his traveling companion in 4B are no longer flying with us today, David," the captain stated clearly. "They are to be offloaded, along with any checked baggage. Mr. Montgomery has refused crew instructions, harassed a minor, and threatened my flight crew. Escort him to the terminal." Cynthia Montgomery, who had been sitting quietly in row 4, finally unbuckled her seatbelt and pushed her way forward. She looked mortified, her expensive handbag clutched to her chest like a shield. "Harrison, please," she whispered, tugging at his sleeve. "Let's just get off. People are staring. We can fly private. Call Richard." "I am not letting this bus driver humiliate me," Harrison snapped at his wife, pulling his arm away. He turned to the security officers. "Do you know who I am? I manage $3 billion in assets. You lay a hand on me, and I will sue this airport, this airline, and you personally into oblivion." The taller of the two officers, a seasoned veteran named Officer Miller, remained entirely unfazed. "Sir, grab your bags. You're holding up the flight. If we have to physically remove you, it becomes a federal offense, and you won't be flying private. You'll be riding in the back of a squad car to the precinct. Your choice." The reality of the situation finally seemed to pierce Harrison's inflated ego. The threat of actual, physical consequence, of being handcuffed in front of a plane full of his peers, was the only language he understood. The color drained from his face, leaving a splotchy, uneven pale. "Fine," Harrison spat, snatching his heavy leather briefcase from the floor where he had dropped it near Elijah's feet. He leaned down, bringing his face dangerously close to the teenager's. "You think you won, kid? You have no idea how the real world works. Enjoy your little charity seat." Captain Rhodes instantly stepped between them, using his broad shoulders to physically block Harrison from Elijah. "Step off my aircraft, Mr. Montgomery. Now." Harrison sneered, turning on his heel. He stormed down the boarding bridge, Cynthia hurrying closely behind him, her head bowed in shame. As they exited, a spontaneous, scattered round of applause broke out from the economy cabin behind the curtain, where passengers had been listening to the entire ordeal. Chloe Davenport, the flight attendant, stood frozen against the galley bulkhead. She looked at Captain Rhodes, her professional smile completely gone, replaced by a deep, hollow dread. She had backed the wrong horse. She had let her own implicit biases dictate her actions, and she knew the captain was not going to let it slide. "Close the door, David," Captain Rhodes ordered the gate agent. He then turned to Chloe. "Secure the cabin for pushback. And Chloe, do not speak to Mr. Brooks for the remainder of this flight unless it is to offer him a beverage or a meal." Captain Rhodes turned to Elijah one last time before heading back to the cockpit. He offered a warm, reassuring smile. "Get some rest, Elijah. Boston is beautiful this time of year." Elijah let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for 20 minutes. "Thank you, Captain. Really." The flight to Boston Logan International was the smoothest Elijah had ever experienced. Sitting in the oversized leather seat, he finally allowed himself to look out the window as the plane banked over Lake Michigan. The adrenaline of the confrontation slowly faded, replaced by a quiet, fierce determination. Harrison Montgomery had tried to make him feel small, to remind him of his place in a hierarchy built on wealth and prejudice. But Elijah had held his ground, and the system, for once, had protected him. When they landed, Elijah gathered his backpack. As he passed the cockpit, Captain Rhodes was standing at the door. He handed Elijah a business card. "I fly a lot of routes to Boston, son. If you ever need anything, or if that MIT interview goes as well as I think it will, you let me know." Elijah took the card, his chest swelling with a newfound confidence. He navigated the sprawling terminals of Logan Airport, caught the Silver Line bus, and headed straight toward Cambridge. Walking onto the Massachusetts Institute of Technology campus, standing in the shadow of the Stater Center, with its radical, geometric architecture, Elijah felt the last remnants of Harrison's insults wash away. He was exactly where he was supposed to be, but while Elijah was stepping into his future, Harrison Montgomery's past actions were rapidly catching up to him, fueled by the relentless speed of the internet. Liam Gallagher, the tech entrepreneur in row 3, had not just recorded the altercation. He had recorded everything, from the moment Harrison dropped his bag on Elijah's lap, to Chloe's biased attempt to downgrade the teenager, to Captain Rhodes's masterful intervention. Liam had utilized the plane's high-speed Wi-Fi to upload the raw, unedited 4-minute video directly to X, formerly Twitter, and LinkedIn before the plane had even reached cruising altitude. He captioned it simply, "Millionaire CEO Harrison, Montgomery of Montgomery Capital, tries to bully a black teenager out of a paid first-class seat. Pilot steps in and kicks the CEO off the flight. Watch privilege meet reality." By the time Harrison and Cynthia had finished screaming at the airline's customer service desk back in Chicago and secured seats on a competitor's flight, the video had crossed 100,000 views. By the time they landed in Boston 4 hours later, it had crossed 5 million. The internet is a merciless judge, and the jury had reached a swift verdict. The video was a perfect storm of modern outrage, blatant entitlement, racial bias, a sympathetic underdog, and a heroic figure in Captain Rhodes. Harrison stepped off his new flight, turning off airplane mode on his smartphone. Instantly, the device began to vibrate violently in his hand. It didn't stop. Notifications cascaded down his screen like a waterfall. Dozens of missed calls, hundreds of text messages, emails flooding his inbox with subjects flagged "urgent PR crisis" and "call immediately." He frowned, tapping on a text from Richard Lawson, his high-priced crisis management consultant. "Richard, Harrison, where the hell are you? Do not speak to the press. Do not post anything. Get to the hotel and call me. We have a massive situation." Confused and irritated, Harrison opened X. His name was the #1 trending topic in the United States. #Harrison Montgomery, #Montgomery Capital, and #Captain Rhodes were dominating the platform. He clicked the top link and felt the blood run cold in his veins. There he was, in crystal-clear high definition, his face contorted in ugly rage, pointing his finger at a calm, terrified teenager. He heard his own voice barking, "I'm a CEO. This kid is the risk." He scrolled down to the comments, watching his reputation disintegrate in real time. But the social media mockery was the least of his problems. The real karma was institutional. Montgomery Capital was a hedge fund, and its lifeblood was the massive institutional investors who parked their money there. These organizations had strict morality clauses and environmental, social, and governance (ESG) mandates. They hated bad press, and they despised public liability. One prominent retweet caught Harrison's eye and made his stomach drop into his designer shoes. It was from the official account of CalPERS, the California Public Employees Retirement System, one of the largest pension funds in the world, and a major investor in Montgomery Capital. CalPERS official. "We are deeply disturbed by the video circulating involving the CEO of one of our external management partners. We are currently reviewing our relationship with Montgomery Capital and take these matters of public conduct and discrimination extremely seriously." Harrison leaned against the cold glass of the airport terminal window, his breath fogging the pain. His wife looked at him, her face pale. "Harrison?" Cynthia asked, her voice trembling. "What is it?" "They filmed it," he whispered, staring at his phone as the stock futures for the publicly traded companies, heavily backed by his fund, began to subtly dip. "They filmed the whole thing." The real-world consequences had arrived, and they were flying first class. The luxury suite at the Boston Harbor Hotel offered a panoramic view of the waterfront, but Harrison Montgomery did not spend a single second looking out the window. The room, which cost $2,000 a night, felt exactly like a prison cell. He paced the thick Persian rug, his tie loosened, his expensive suit jacket thrown carelessly over a velvet armchair. The television was on, muted, displaying a prominent national news network. At the bottom of the screen, the chyron crawled with relentless malice. Hedge fund CEO caught on tape, harassing black teen over first-class seat. His smartphone, plugged into the wall to keep its rapidly draining battery alive, chimed with the dreadful consistency of a ticking bomb. "Richard, what do you mean they are freezing the assets?" Harrison barked into his Bluetooth earpiece, his voice ragged from hours of shouting. On the other end of the line, Richard Lawson, the crisis management consultant who charged $1,000 an hour, sounded entirely exhausted. "Harrison, you need to stop yelling and listen to me. This isn't just a Twitter storm anymore. This has breached the containment of social media and entered the financial sector. CalPERS just issued a formal press release. They are initiating an emergency review of their $500 million position with Montgomery Capital." Harrison stopped pacing. The blood drained from his face, pooling in his stomach like lead. $500 million? They can't do that. We have a contractual lock-up period. "They invoked the morality clause, Harrison," Richard replied flatly. "Section 4, paragraph B. Conduct detrimental to the public image and fiduciary trust of the institutional partner." You gave them the exact ammunition they needed to pull their capital without a penalty. And it's not just them. The Teachers' Retirement System of Texas just emailed your investor relations team. They want a meeting by tomorrow morning. Your firm is bleeding out, and the wound is entirely self-inflicted. Before Harrison could formulate a defense, his laptop screen, sitting open on the mahogany desk, illuminated with an incoming video call request. It was an emergency summons from the Montgomery Capital Board of Directors. Harrison swallowed hard, a sudden wave of nausea washing over him. He clicked accept. The screen split into a grid of 6 faces. These were the titans of industry who backed his firm, men and women who cared only about the bottom line and abhorred public scandal. In the center square was William Danforth, the chairman of the board, a man whose icy demeanor made Harrison look warm by comparison. "William, let me explain," Harrison started, attempting to project his usual aura of dominant confidence. "The video is completely taken out of context. The kid was belligerent, and the flight attendant—" "Silence, Harrison," William interrupted, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that echoed through the laptop speakers. "There is no context that justifies what we all watched on high-definition video. We heard the audio. We saw the intimidation. You threatened a minor, disrupted a commercial flight, and humiliated this firm on a global stage." "It's a PR hiccup," Harrison pleaded, desperation finally cracking his arrogant facade. "I'll issue an apology. I'll make a donation to some urban youth charity. We can spin this." "A PR hiccup?" A woman in the top right corner, Evelyn Reed, the head of the firm's largest private equity partner, scoffed loudly. "Harrison, do you know who that boy is? The internet did its job. His name is Elijah Brooks. He is 17 years old. He builds autonomous robotics out of recycled materials in his high school. He was flying to Boston for a final interview for a full-ride engineering scholarship at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology." Harrison felt his knees weaken. He collapsed into the desk chair, staring blankly at the screen. Evelyn wasn't finished. "And do you know who his sponsor is? The man who bought that first-class ticket? Dr. Linus. The very same Dr. Linus who sits on the advisory board of 3 of our largest tech portfolio companies. You didn't just insult a random teenager, Harrison. You publicly humiliated the protege of one of the most respected philanthropists in the tech sector. Dr. Linus called me personally an hour ago. He was livid. The walls of the hotel suite seemed to close in on him. The irony was suffocating, a heavy, unyielding weight pressing against his chest. He had looked at a young black teenager and saw someone who didn't belong. someone beneath his notice. In reality, he had attacked a boy connected to the very power structures Harrison worshipped. "We have taken a vote," William Danforth said, his face devoid of any sympathy. "Effective immediately, the board is enacting the emergency succession plan. You are stripped of your title as Chief Executive Officer. You will resign from the board. You will surrender your equity shares at the current, rapidly depreciating market value. If you fight this, we will publicly terminate you with cause, and you will lose everything." "You're firing me?" Harrison whispered, his voice cracking. "I built this firm. I am Montgomery Capital." "Not anymore," William said coldly. "Your severance paperwork has been sent to your personal email. Do not contact the office. Do not speak to the press. Goodbye, Harrison." The screen went black. Harrison sat in the deafening silence of the $2,000 suite. His phone buzzed again. It was a text from his wife, Cynthia, who had booked a separate room down the hall. "Cynthia, I'm flying back to Chicago alone. My lawyer will be contacting yours. I cannot be associated with this. Do not follow me." In the span of 6 hours, a single act of arrogant cruelty, born from deep-seated prejudice, had systematically dismantled his empire, his reputation, and his marriage. The hard karma had not just knocked on his door, it had kicked it off the hinges. 2 miles away from the luxurious hotel suite where Harrison Montgomery was watching his empire crumble, the atmosphere was entirely different. The sprawling, intellectual haven of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology hummed with the quiet, relentless energy of 1,000 brilliant minds at work. Elijah Brooks sat on a firm leather bench outside the admissions office in the Stater Center, his hands resting heavily on his knees. He was nervous, but it was a vastly different kind of nervous than the sheer terror he had experienced on the airplane just hours prior. This was the anxiety of anticipation, the thrilling, terrifying fear of standing on the precipice of a lifelong dream and peering over the edge. He was wearing the same crisp white button-down and navy blue blazer. He had ironed them meticulously in his modest hotel room that morning, making sure every crease was sharp, every button perfectly aligned. His backpack, containing the schematics and salvaged prototypes he had spent the last 3 years building, rested on the floor between his sneakers. He stared at the frosted glass door of the conference room, listening to the muffled voices on the other side. Elijah took a deep, steadying breath, trying to compartmentalize the trauma of the morning. Harrison Montgomery had tried to strip him of his dignity, to remind him of a systemic hierarchy designed to keep kids from the south side of Chicago out of first-class cabins and prestigious universities. But Captain Rhodes had intervened. The system, for a brief, shining moment, had worked. Now it was up to Elijah to prove that he deserved the seat, not just on the plane, but in this hallowed institution. The heavy wooden door opened, and a tall, distinguished professor with silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a tweed jacket stepped out. "Elijah Brooks, I'm Dr. Eris Kensington, head of the Mechanical Engineering Department. Please come in." Elijah stood up, his heart hammering against his ribs. He wiped his palms on his trousers, shook the professor's hand firmly, and walked into the grand conference room. 3 other faculty members were seated around a massive, polished oak table. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the whiteboards lining the walls. This was it, the final hurdle, the culmination of thousands of hours spent soldering wires in a drafty garage, reading advanced physics textbooks by the light of a single bulb, and dreaming of a world beyond his neighborhood. For the first 20 minutes, the panel was intimidatingly formal. They did not ask about his background, his struggles, or the essay he had written about overcoming adversity. They treated him strictly as a peer, diving straight into the deep end of mechanical and software engineering. "Mr. Brooks," began Dr. Kensington, pulling a thick file toward him, "your submission details the construction of an autonomous search and rescue drone utilizing predominantly recycled materials. You claim to have achieved a sustained flight time of over 40 minutes using salvaged lithium-ion cells. Explain the power management matrix you developed to prevent thermal runaway." Elijah felt a momentary flash of panic, but as soon as his mind latched onto the technical problem, the anxiety evaporated. He was in his element. He walked over to the whiteboard, picked up a dry erase marker, and began to draw. He explained the custom cooling fins he had machined from scrap aluminum, detailing how he integrated them into the chassis to maximize airflow. He wrote out the algorithms he had coded to dynamically throttle the power draw from the degraded battery cells, balancing the load to prevent any single cell from overheating. His eyes lit up, his hands moving animatedly as he filled the board with complex equations and circuit diagrams. The professors pushed back, testing the limits of his knowledge. A female professor, Dr. Evelyn Carter, challenged his choices in gyroscopic stabilization, pointing out potential flaws in his sensor calibration during high-wind scenarios. Elijah didn't flinch. He acknowledged her point, then rapidly outlined a secondary software patch he had developed that used predictive modeling to compensate for sudden atmospheric shifts, a solution he had tested during winter squalls over Lake Michigan. He spoke with a clarity and passion that was impossible to fabricate. He wasn't just regurgitating textbook theories. He was demonstrating a profound, intuitive understanding of applied physics and engineering. The panel exchanged subtle, impressed glances. They were used to interviewing brilliant students, teenagers who had been groomed for Ivy League admissions since kindergarten, armed with unlimited resources and private tutors. But standing before them was a young man who had built a functional, highly sophisticated drone out of garbage, driven by sheer, unadulterated genius and an unbreakable will. As the technical portion of the interview concluded, Dr. Kensington leaned back in his heavy leather chair, folding his hands over his stomach. A small, knowing smile played on his lips, softening the severe lines of his face. "Your understanding of fluid dynamics, as it applies to drone propulsion, is remarkable, Elijah," Dr. Kensington said, his voice echoing slightly in the large room. "Especially considering your limited resources. The predictive modeling algorithm you designed is something I would expect from a graduate student working in our advanced robotics lab, not a high school senior." "Thank you, sir," Elijah said, returning to his seat, a flush of pride warming his cheeks. "But," Dr. Kensington continued, his tone shifting, becoming more serious, "engineering at this level isn't just about math, physics, and code. It is about problem-solving under extreme pressure. It's about maintaining your composure when systems fail catastrophically, or when you are challenged by external, sometimes hostile, variables that you cannot control." Dr. Kensington paused, glancing at the other panel members who all nodded in silent agreement. He reached out and tapped the keyboard of his laptop, turning the screen slightly so Elijah could see. Paused on the display was the viral video. It was a freeze frame of Harrison Montgomery's red, furious face, pointing a finger directly at the camera, with Elijah seated calmly in the background. Elijah's stomach dropped. The triumphant feeling of acing the technical interview vanished instantly. He lowered his gaze, suddenly acutely self-conscious, the lingering humiliation of the morning threatening to resurface. "Sir, I didn't want any of that to happen. I just wanted to get to this interview. I didn't cause that disruption." "I know you didn't," Dr. Kensington said gently, closing the laptop. "The entire world knows you didn't. But what we saw in that video was a young man facing an incredibly intimidating, unjust, and highly volatile situation. You were confronted by a powerful, wealthy individual who tried to use his status to bully you into submission. Dr. Carter leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. You didn't yell, Elijah. You didn't lose your temper. You didn't resort to insults. You stood your ground, maintained your absolute dignity, and articulated your rights perfectly. You displayed a level of emotional intelligence and grace under pressure that cannot be taught in a lecture hall. When we select students for this specific program, Dr. Kensington added, we are looking for future leaders. We are looking for individuals who will not buckle when the world pushes against them. Character, Mr. Brooks, is the foundation upon which true innovation is built. The distinguished professor stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. He extended his right hand across the massive oak table. It is my absolute honor to inform you that the committee has reached a unanimous decision, Dr. Kensington said, his eyes shining with genuine respect. We are offering you the full-ride Engineering and Innovation Scholarship to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Welcome to the incoming freshman class, Mr. Brooks. Elijah stared at the extended hand for a fraction of a second, his mind struggling to process the magnitude of the words. Then, a massive, brilliant smile broke across his face. He reached out and shook Dr. Kensington's hand firmly. Tears pricked the corners of his eyes, but this time they were not tears of frustration or fear. They were tears of profound, overwhelming triumph. He had faced the absolute worst of society's prejudices, a system that had tried to force him to the back of the plane, and he had emerged completely victorious. While Elijah was securing his brilliant future, Harrison Montgomery was watching his disintegrate into ash. The fallout from the flight was catastrophic, a textbook example of how quickly the modern world can dismantle a life built on arrogance and entitlement. The emergency board meeting had only been the first domino to fall. Within 48 hours of his termination, as CEO of Montgomery Capital, the institutional investors began to pull their funds en masse. The massive pension funds, notably the California Public Employees Retirement System, CalPERS, terrified of being associated with a viral racist incident, invoked their strict morality clauses, draining billions of dollars in managed assets from the firm. Montgomery Capital's stock plummeted, triggering a panic sell-off among the remaining private investors. The firm, once a titan of the Chicago financial district, was forced to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy restructuring just 3 weeks later. Harrison, having been forced to surrender his equity shares at the absolute lowest market value during his termination, lost the vast majority of his net worth overnight. The legal battles followed swiftly and relentlessly. The airline, eager to distance itself from the PR nightmare, permanently banned Harrison from flying on their aircraft and filed a massive civil suit against him for the financial losses incurred by the delayed flight and the subsequent passenger compensations. The flight attendant who had sided with him was terminated, and her legal counsel immediately threatened litigation against Harrison for creating a hostile environment that led to her firing. But the most devastating blow came from within his own home. Cynthia Montgomery, mortified by the public humiliation and the sudden, terrifying loss of their social standing, filed for divorce. She hired the most aggressive, ruthless divorce attorney in the city, successfully arguing that Harrison's gross public misconduct had irreparably damaged her own reputation and financial security. The ensuing settlement stripped Harrison of his luxury penthouses, his collection of vintage sports cars, and his access to the exclusive country clubs that had once defined his entire existence. He was forced to move into a modest, rented apartment on the outskirts of the city. His phone, once constantly ringing with calls from politicians, tech moguls, and Wall Street executives, fell completely silent. He was a pariah, a cautionary tale whispered about in boardrooms and locker rooms. When he tried to secure a consulting position at a smaller, rival firm, he was laughed out of the lobby by the same people who used to beg for his business. No one wanted the man who had become the internet's favorite villain. He had traded his first-class seat for a permanent, humiliating place in the shadows of public disgrace. Hard karma had not just knocked on his door, it had leveled his entire house. 6 months later, the bitter chill of winter had descended upon Boston, blanketing the MIT campus in a pristine layer of white snow. The viral incident on Flight 4482 had faded from the relentless cycle of the 24-hour news networks, replaced by new scandals and global events. The world had moved on, as it always does. But for Elijah Brooks, the world had fundamentally changed. He was a familiar face in the advanced robotics laboratory, often staying late into the night, fueled by strong coffee and an insatiable curiosity. He was currently leading a team of graduate students, despite only being a freshman, in the development of a new generation of autonomous drones designed to deliver medical supplies to disaster zones. He had friends who challenged him, mentors who believed in him, and a future so incredibly bright it was practically blinding. On a quiet Tuesday evening, Elijah was sitting at his workbench, carefully soldering a microprocessor, when his smartphone buzzed. He wiped his hands on a towel and picked it up. It was an email from Captain Nathaniel Rhodes. They had kept in touch over the past few months, the seasoned pilot occasionally checking in on the brilliant student he had protected. Elijah, the email read, just landed at Logan. The airline officially awarded me the Commendation for Passenger Safety and Conflict Resolution today. They even framed the letter. Wanted you to be the first to know. Keep building those drones. The sky is yours. Captain Rhodes. Elijah smiled, a deep, resonant feeling of warmth spreading through his chest. He typed a quick, heartfelt reply, thanking the captain once again for his unwavering integrity. As he set the phone down and picked up his soldering iron, Elijah glanced out the laboratory window. The snow was falling steadily, illuminated by the campus streetlights. He thought about the journey that had brought him here. The long nights in Chicago, the terrifying confrontation on the airplane, the unwavering support of his professors. He had learned a profound truth at 17 years old. Power does not come from a bank account, a tailored suit, or a premium seat on an airplane. True power comes from the content of one's character, the strength to stand firm in the face of injustice, and the brilliant, enduring light of a mind focused on changing the world. Elijah lowered his safety goggles, turned back to his circuitry, and went back to work. The story of Elijah Brooks and Harrison Montgomery is a powerful testament to the reality that entitlement and prejudice will eventually meet their match. While wealth might buy a premium seat, it can never purchase class, dignity, or immunity from consequence. Elijah's quiet strength in the face of blatant bullying reminds us that holding your ground with integrity is the most powerful weapon against injustice. The skies belong to everyone, and true elevation comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down.